Well, hey, welcome to the summit. Nils and I now get to do something that we're incredibly excited about and that we've been working on for a while. What we're going to take you through is actually a new vision, not just for Tacton, but a new vision for how we see go-to-market strategies and sales execution evolving within industrial manufacturing. We've done a tremendous amount of research over the last 12 months, and we got a lot of external help for that. We hired McKinsey to help us with that, a few other Gartner that we have a great relationship with, and a few other kind of external thought leaders in the CPQ space. And we've really evolved our vision for both the product and the company based on some of the key findings that came out of that work. And so, interestingly, Nils and I are going to kind of tag team this. We're going to use an approach here that maybe you haven't seen in the past. As most of you know, as customers, we typically engage with three different groups within our customers. So the first one is obviously IT, and we got a lot of you folks represented in the audience today. The second is engineering and product management, because these are the folks who are launching new products and need to enable the channel to be able to sell those efficiently, effectively, and most importantly, accurately. And then the third is the sales organization or the go-to-market group. So, the chief customer or chief commercial officer, the chief revenue officer, the EVP of sales, head of sales, right? And just a little more background in terms of my experiences. I've been in the software business for about 30 years, but I've really majored during that time in sales, marketing, and product management. And for the sales leaders in the room, or the folks that support the sales organization, I have a tremendous amount of empathy for the challenge in front of you in terms of enabling your salespeople to have much more effective and efficient and trusted conversations with your customers. Nils has a tremendous amount of experience in product management, engineering, and operations. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to actually present our strategy, our vision for the company, first from the perspective of the go-to-market executives, and then second from the perspective of the head of product, engineering, and operations. And I think you're going to see some interesting comparisons and contrasts in terms of how these two things really fit together so that we can bring these organizations together. And by the way, this is the most important part of this whole thing. Bringing those two organizations together to be able to much more effectively drive your sales organization, okay? So that's what we're going to do here over the next 45 minutes, right? So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to summarize for you the 5 major findings that came out of the study that we did. The first one, and many of you may have heard about this, just based on things that you read and that type of thing, but the one thing that we know is not only is the buyer really changing, but as a result of that, the buying process is changing as well. And by the way, when I say buyer, I'm talking about your customers, right? The people you're selling to that are buying your product. And what we know is, particularly since the pandemic, there's been a huge shift in terms of the mindset of that buyer. The first thing we know is that by next year, virtually the entire workforce is going to be comprised of what we call digital natives. And what does that mean? These are people who have never known the world without the internet. They've never known the world without a smartphone. They've never known a world where they couldn't actually acquire products online or digitally in a very efficient and convenient way. As a result of that fact, the second thing we know about these buyers are, when they execute a buying process, about 80% of that buying process today occurs without any direct interaction with a salesperson. Okay? Now, interestingly, you go back 3 years ago, that number was 67% of the buying process occurred without engaging a salesperson. And so interestingly, since the pandemic, not only has this increased, but it's accelerated, okay? And the third one, which is a little unsettling, If you pull these folks aside and you ask them, hey, if you could do this if you could purchase this product without ever having to interact with the salesperson, would you do it? And about 50% of them will tell you, yes, they would. Now, in industrial manufacturing, that's not, practical today. But what this indicates is a huge mind shift on the part of that buyer. And so the way in which they want to be able to interact with you as a vendor, as a consultant, as a partner is fundamentally changing. So that's the first trend. The second trend here really relates to differentiation strategies and how that's evolved in the last 3 years. We all know that as you introduce a new product, that over time, it becomes more commoditized within the market. Your competitors come out with similar products, there are different alternatives, those types of things. In parallel with that, what you find then is it becomes much more difficult to actually differentiate that product. This is kind of basic physics in new product introduction. And so as a result of that, what we've seen, particularly in the last couple of years, are two key shifts in differentiation strategy. The first one being, we hear this from our customers all the time. We've got to start selling solutions. And by the way, we've been hearing that for a couple of years. What that meant initially was multiple products typically configured into a system, right, that could then be positioned for that customer. And if you look at the things that we did around system configuration and that type of thing, we enabled our platform to be able to support that. More importantly, though, is this idea then of taking that system and wrapping it in a set of managed services and perhaps selling that entire solution rather than as a capital investment for that buyer, selling it essentially as a recurring service. So the example we give here all the time is we have a customer that produces firefighting equipment. And you go back even just a couple of years ago, the salespeople would go meet with a municipality and they would talk to them about fire trucks and different pieces of equipment, and they would configure the fire truck based on the needs of the customer. And the conversation was really around water capacity and probably 5 or 6 key criteria for configuring that fire truck. Now what they do is they have a very different conversation. They sit down, they say, tell me about the types of fires that occur within this region on an annual basis. How many of them are commercial? How many of them are residential? What is the geographic layout of that region? Where are the critical centers like hospitals and schools and universities? But based on about 12 or 15 different outcome-based questions that they work through with the local municipality, they then come back with an entire solution of firefighting, not just equipment, but the different combinations of firefighting equipment that they need, and then also they provide all of the fleet management services that are required to maintain that equipment. Now, relatively straightforward example, but think about this truly from a sales leader's perspective. You're trying to enable there a very different conversation between your sellers and those buyers. And the way you go enable that, you really have to think about that in completely different ways going forward. Okay, so that's the first differentiation strategy that we've seen change. The second thing, and oftentimes these things happen in parallel. What our customers are realizing is one of the key ways that you differentiate is based on the experience you provide to the buyer during that buying process. Now, the retail world, the consumer packaged goods world, they kind of figured this out a while ago. But because of that shift in the buyer's mindset and the buying process, this has become one of the most critical things you must focus on today. And it's not just about making it more convenient for them to find information on your products. It's about truly engaging them in a two-way conversation, right, that builds a huge amount of trust in you and that buyer. okay? Now, third trend is directly related to that, which is if you're going to drive that kind of conversation, it's got to be a highly consultative, expertise-driven type of interaction, okay? And so your ability to drive that consultative expertise, not just in face-to-face communications, but in digital conversations as well, has never been more critical, okay? And interestingly, we've always thought about this, how do we better enable the direct seller or the dealer, the face-to-face interactions? And, we've talked for a number of years about this idea of guided selling. What's fascinating is the conversation that we've been having with our customers has fundamentally shifted, particularly in the last 12 months, to this idea of, in addition to enabling and guiding that face-to-face seller, we've got to guide and direct that customer directly as well. And so it's now a concept of this, the paradigm shift here is guided buying. Okay? Now, that's all really complicated at this point in time because of the continued turnover within industrial manufacturing. This stat is fairly consistent, really, regardless of where you are on the planet. But last year, roughly, turnover in industrial manufacturing was about 37%. That's the best it'd been in a long time. So think about this for a second in terms of, you're trying to codify and capture this knowledge, this expertise, this collective genius of your company, drive it into every one of these interactions, and every year, 4 out of 10 people walk out the door, right? And so, in just about every customer conversation that I'm in, this issue of, hey, over the next 5 to 10 years, we expect to turn over our sales organization by 100%. During that same time frame, we will likely turn over engineering by 100% within that time frame. In some cases, it's even sooner than that. I've heard 3 to 5 years. Okay. And so this is top of mind when you talk to those go-to-market executives. This is top of mind in terms of how do we, we've got to be more consultative, but how do we preserve that expertise going forward? And then the last trend that we identified here, and we've talked about this for a while, but this idea of speed to market. So you need to be innovating regularly. You need to bring new products, new capabilities to market faster. But what we're seeing today is this idea of speed to sales is equally important. We call the combination of those two things go-to-market agility. And what that says is that, number one, we're getting data about these buyer interactions that we can use real time, day in and day out, to make better decisions about our sales strategy, our marketing strategy, our products themselves, our suppliers, right? We're able to, regardless of what our channels are, we're able to enable those channels much faster than we ever had in the past. But most importantly, it's not just about enablement, it's about adoption. How do you drive adoption of that new conversation that firefighting sales force is having? How do you make sure that you're driving as deep of adoption as fast as you possibly can? Okay. And so these are kind of the 5 things that we identified. And so interesting, if you look at this in total, I got new buyers and new buying processes that we're dealing with. You're trying to package new managed services driven solutions while at the same time trying to drive a better experience for that buyer. We're trying to drive that deep consultative expertise into every one of those interactions while at the same time we've got people leaving. And then finally, if we figure out those 4, we got to be able to change it really quickly because the market's constantly changing, our products are constantly changing, our customers are constantly changing in terms of what they need and want and that type of thing. Okay, and so that's why what we saw, earlier this year was this fundamental shift in terms of the conversations that we were having with specifically the go-to-market executives within our customers. Okay, and it was no longer about simply how do I make the quote to order process more efficient, although that's very, very important. But it was more oriented around how do we transform that buyer experience? How do we fundamentally transform our sales organization to have a much more trusted and valuable interaction with the customer? Okay? And we've kind of lumped all of this together, and this is not a tagline for us. We're just trying to come up with a term that encapsulated all these concepts simultaneously. But what we're referring to this internally as is this idea of differentiated buyer engagement. It's focused on the buyer, it's focused on differentiation, and it's focused on true engagement, consultative engagement with that buyer. Okay? So those are kind of the main trends that we've seen that are really driving our strategy going forward. The question is then, how do you take all of that and instantiate it within a product or a technology? And so, we spent some time, and Jesper Alfredson, you'll spend some time with him tomorrow talking about our product vision, our technology vision. We did a fundamental shift in terms of the way we started to think about what we were trying to encapsulate within Tacton. So you've all probably worked with an individual, either as a buyer or as part of a sales organization, that was a great consultant during the buying process. People call these sales engineers, solution consultants, field engineers. But think of for a second the best one of these people you've ever known. And think about what they were really, really good at. So the first thing is, they were great at, establishing trust with that customer and then actually starting to guide them down a certain path for a certain solution based on kind of the high-level objectives of that customer. Then when they got to the point where they were really going to start talking about products and solutions, they could drive that conversation not just based on feature, functions, and options, but they could drive it based on actual business outcomes that customer was trying to drive. Okay. Then the second piece of this, we talked about the managed services components of the solutions. They then need to drive configuration around a set of services that match well with that product or set of products or system. And the third piece of this is we've got to be able to provide a price. We've got to make sure that it's optimized for that particular situation. We've got to make sure that the rules that we're applying for that pricing are consistent from buyer to buyer, from interaction to interaction, from deal to deal. Then the fourth piece of this is as they are making different decisions based on business outcomes that they're trying to drive, that great solution consultant can help the customer actually visualize what this thing's going to look like and what those different trade-offs translate into in terms of a layout of that system or those types of things. And then finally, I think all of us in this room are subjected to a level of regulatory requirements that we've never been subjected to in the past. No, by the way, your customers are being driven by a set of regulatory requirements like they've never seen previously. And so this solution consultant has the ability to make, thoughtful recommendations in terms of different, trade-offs that they can make to, best position them from a regulatory standpoint. Okay? So if I were going to define the core competencies of that human being, they tend to be these 5 or 6 things. Okay? Then when we start talking about how do you then take this and make it available as a product or a technology, the first thing we're going to do is we take all of those kind of core competencies, and what we're going to do is we're going to, first of all, help you codify this internal expertise. We do that, by the way, today through a lot of the product modeling that we do with you and that type of thing. But we don't want to replace that internal expertise. What we want to do is amplify it with AI. Again, what we're trying to do here is take a very practical and pragmatic approach to the way we utilize AI going forward. And so we never want to get rid of that internal expertise, that collective genius of your company, because that tends to be one of your key differentiators. So we want to preserve that, but we want to amplify it with AI. Then we need to make this available via all of the different channels that new buyer wants to interact with you through. And again, it's not just about making it more convenient. It's about making sure that if I start, the conversation digitally and I transition to an inside salesperson, then transition to an outside salesperson, that engagement is, number one, as effective across all of those channels, but it's also coordinated. So I don't have to start the conversation over when I move from one channel to the next. Okay? And then finally, and this is another kind of thing that's going to be evolving for us over the next year. One of the things we're most excited about is if you think about all the kind of data that you can get from all these different buyer interactions, and using that literally day in and day out to make product decisions, to make supplier decisions, to make operations decisions, right? The ability to harness that and drive that agility that we talked about from a go-to-market standpoint is incredibly valuable and incredibly exciting. And incidentally, that data, we're going to feed back into the AI engine, and this is how this chief solution consultant learns over time. Okay? So that's kind of the blueprint, if you will, for what the product looks like. And then as Bo really, and this combination of these things that, we believe make up this concept of the differentiated buyer engagement. Now, clearly, we can't operate in a vacuum here. We've got to be part of your overall kind of manufacturing ecosystem, if you will. And so our ability to drive deep two-way integration with all of those different systems that make up, again, your manufacturing ecosystem is critically important, and we will continue to invest there. Okay? And this is where this kind of transitions from the go-to-market executives' kind of perspective on that, which is I'm trying to drive differentiated buyer engagement. Now we're going to transition to the head of engineering and the head of product, who's really wrestling with this idea of not only the smart factory, but how to make that smart factory buyer-centric. And this is probably the biggest thing that we are trying to counsel our customers on literally day in and day out, which is, that smart factory must be focused on the buyer. If not, there's a lot of ways that you can waste a lot of money going down this path. And so our fundamental belief is you got to build this around the buyer. Okay? So with that, I'm going to transition this to my good friend, Mr. Nils Olsson.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Sure.
So as we can see, when it comes to the challenges that we face in terms of going to market, how we address our customers' need in a way that they expect it to be addressed, there are two key challenges. One is to make sure that it's easy for the customer. It has to be easy for them to understand what you can do for them and why they should be engaging with you. The second one is you have to be reliable in how you bring that promise to them once they decide on going with you. And what that means is, as Jeff just went through, of course, with a higher degree of interaction with the customer, making sure that you have the right capabilities for customers to explore your product options in terms of what it means for them, preferably without even having to talk to anyone in your organization, because that's what they're expecting. You also need to make sure that you drive a good promise on that experience. So with the new strategies that we're seeing, as Jeff went through, outcome-based solutions, managed services, making sure that you engage buyers in a more efficient, effective, and trusted way, that also means that you're sitting with a couple of new challenges internally. So if we look at the buying process that has changed, of course, less interaction with customers up front. We see from data from analysts like Gartner, from companies like Accenture, Capgemini, that customers are making their buying decisions without talking to you. Now, that is a bit of an issue, actually, not just for you, but it's also an issue for the customer, because they typically need expert advice that you are sitting on, that you have. So very often when customers engage, they're not just talking about, hey, what could you do for me? But they're also kind of interested in understanding, how should I be addressing a certain issue? Because typically in your field of expertise, you are the expert, not your customer typically. Your customers will have a very high degree of interest in it and a very good amount of knowledge. But it's kind of like if we just look at us as a company, Tacton, we're really good at CPQ and how we, as Jeff very eloquently put it, how we codify your product information to make sure that it's easily available to different people in your organization and outside your organization. The same way, of course, for every one of us, we are sitting on information that's highly interesting for the customer. So the key issue here is, how do we make sure that that knowledge, that expertise that you're sitting on gets translated into what the customer is experiencing? How do you make sure not only that the customer understands why they should be buying from you, but also how you will deliver on it? So what we're seeing here is this external pressure that you're basically getting from this increased amount of customer interaction. It will put pressure on your internal functions as well. It will put pressure on how do you make sure that you have timely and correct delivery with good margins. Now, in a short summary, it basically means with increased differentiation, it becomes more tricky to make sure that you have margins under control. Now, in the perfect world, the way we look at things is, the three key areas in any organization is, of course, sales, of course, engineering, and of course, your operations, your way of delivering orders to customers, your order fulfillment team. And ideally, as we're seeing here, the customer should be in the center of this. They should be perfectly aware of what you have, what it means for them, and when you could deliver it to them. The issue that we're seeing is particularly, though, in this area, the quote and order area. So when we develop new products, of course, we introduce them to sales. We make sure that they are, we train salespeople, we train sales staff, we put in CPQ solutions, we try and make it available, of course, as we said, to your end customers. At the same time, we're, of course, introducing this to production. We're making sure that we have the setup for how you will deliver these products to customers once they buy. What tends to happen, though, is in between a customer inquiring around your products and you getting that order and delivering on it, there's a ton of work that has to go into that. Very often meaning that engineering is sitting as a little bit of a, let's call a bottleneck in between sales and delivery. So with this bottleneck, basically what we're experiencing are two key issues. One is, of course, if your engineering staff is being so occupied with dealing with customer interest and customer requests, as well as how you could serve them in the right way, you will also have issues that your engineering staff is putting time into an area that is not giving you new, better products. So it's a ton of engineering effort that ends up in kind of just making sure your business works in the right way. But at the same time, that also produces an issue, of course, in terms of how you interact with your customers. If you look at customers expecting you to have information available for them online, easily retrievable, not having to talk to anyone in your organization when they're making their initial decisions around what vendors to go for. If you sit with a need of engineering staff having to interact with the customer, that's going to prevent you from doing that. So it poses an issue in two ways. It's a drain in terms of your engineering staff, where they could be putting that into more valuable tasks, but it's also putting a bit of a limitation on how well you can interact with your customers. So at the end of the day, what we're looking at here is how do we get margins under control? If you talk to industrialists, they will typically say, if you have lead time and quality under control, you don't have issues with cost. Now, what is required to get to that point if you're having interaction with customers that is not necessitating people to be talking to the customer all the time? Well, the first one is you have to have a way of dealing with customer specials. So we all know that customers will look at your existing products, the way you could deliver value to them, and then there's going to be something that is a little bit different. How do you make sure that you take care of as much of those specials in a smart and preferably automatic way? Sometimes it's just a matter of making a beam a little bit longer. How about being able to deal with that without having to put engineering on the task? The second one is order management, making sure that you can place an order based on a quote immediately into your order management system without having people having to translate or interpret that quote is absolutely crucial. Because that means that you're actually getting not only an efficiency increase in order management and a quality check in terms of the quote matching the order that you end up delivering, but it also means that you get much better capabilities in production planning. If you can look at the quotes that you have issued and know what that would mean in terms of order fulfillment, all of a sudden you can do forecasting in a much, much better way. And then, of course, we have the last one, which is, I think, nobody is able to avoid completely. Non-conformity control. When things go wrong, how do you make sure that it doesn't happen again? Because we will have mistakes. There will be some promise that went to a customer and we weren't able to fulfill that, and all of a sudden we're sitting with issues. Either it's just internal, it's rework in terms of orders, it's engineering effort that we need to put into solving the issue. But sometimes it, lands in really bad spots. You're not able to do what you promised the customer, and all of a sudden you're sitting with penalty fees and warranty costs. But making sure that you learn from those mistakes, that information gets fed back into the system is going to be absolutely crucial. So kind of what you said, Jeff, when you're looking at this, it's not just automating, it's also putting in place a continuous improvement cycle. It's making sure that you learn from the mistakes that you've made in the most efficient way possible. Now, of course, we talked about the brain drain. That's not just an issue for sales or your interaction with customers, how you put quotes together. It's equally an issue, as you said, Jeff, in engineering, in supply chain, making sure that you have the knowledge of how will you deliver products and solutions to your customers in the best way. So with that, what we're basically seeing is this classic map. This is a very high-level interpretation of the typical business processes that we see in any manufacturing company. Of course, we have marketing and sales, where we want to be super agile with our customers. But then we have the orders, production, and installation, where we have to be really good at meeting the demands that we promise to the customer. Of course, we have services, where we typically make a lot of margin. And then on top of that, we have the introduction of new products to help sharpen the toolkit, to make sure that we have the products that are going to win in the long run, that we continuously become more and more competitive on the market. A big issue that we're seeing is the systems of record that are in place. It's CRM systems, it's ERP systems, it's PLM, and others. They tend to cater to the home audience. They tend to be focused on the discrete processes that you find in each one of these different process steps. And as a result, what typically happens is when you're selling a product, where you're, of course, more interested in what's the outcome for the customer and what's the price for the products on the paper that you're submitting to your customer in terms of a quote, that typically doesn't need information around how will you build this product, exactly what parts are going into this product. And as a result, they tend to be siloed. That brings a huge need in order to be able to span the end-to-end process. How do you make sure that the quote you issue, the promise that you give to customers online, is aligned with what you can deliver and when you can deliver it? So back to the perfect world. How do we address the quote and order issue? Having people thrown at the problem is not going to do it. It's not going to solve this issue. What we have to do is to think differently. We have to apply information in a way that perhaps hasn't been possible in the past. At Tacton, we've been talking about AI, but I just want to dive a little bit more into AI, Because of course AI could solve a lot of the issues here. But AI is kind of, we're reading about it in the news. It's scary to see how smart chatbots are. They can generate these nice images. Sometimes you even see movies being created by AI. But if we think about it in terms of applied science to the issues that we're facing, there are 3 key types of AI that can solve very different types of problems. The first one is what we call predefined or symbolic AI. It is when you have the knowledge of what works and put that into a solution that can actually help you get answers quickly and easily. That's something that Tacton has been doing for a long time. So when you set up configuration models for our products, we're seeing that type of symbolic AI in action. What we're seeing now, though, are 2 additional types of AI that will drastically change how well you can deal with these issues. The first one is machine learning. So basically understanding when different things happen, what will that have as an effect on your product range, your interaction with customers. And the other one is, of course, generative AI, the AI that we're hearing a lot about in the news. That's something that we could describe in a way as preemptive AI. How do you make sure that you can meet customer needs, meet customer requirements, without having a person interacting with the customer, but still do it in a trusted way? So, for instance, when we look at, I think it was Bo you had on your slide there in the beginning, if you get an RFP, could be like 600-800 pages of requirements from a customer. What if we could take that RFP, feed it into a solution that gives us the best option for the customer, that understands what these customer requirements actually mean in terms of requirements from your point of view on your products and solutions. So there's a ton of ways that AI will help us bridge this gap, and that's what we are extremely committed to pursuing in the future. So the needed agility in engineering, basically what it means is guided buying, it's becoming almost a must. As Jeff showed you, the way that you want to interact with customers, it's not an option. Customers are expecting you to be easy to interact with and reliable in terms of response. But what that means in turn is a lot of codified and preserved knowledge within the organization, where you're making sure that the information and knowledge that you have is not leaving when people do. That is what we see as the absolute must for profitable delivery. So winning in the market is of course crucial to drive a good organization. But next to that, you also have to make sure that you make money on the products that you sell. If you don't fix both of those 2 issues, then there's going to be trouble. So back to the buyer-centric smart factory, of course, making sure that you cater to the way that the customer wants to interact with you is going to be crucial. But it also means that you have to have the back-end structure to support it. That means being able to validate information that you're sending out to customers, staying on top of things like digital twins. How do you make sure you know what you have delivered to customers? Industry X.0, and I'm putting X.0 here because, guys, it was 4.0, and then somebody said 5.0, and then somebody said 6.0, and it's going so fast I don't know which number it is anymore. But what it means is making sure that you connect the information that is going out to customers all the way down into the factory in the smartest way possible. Of course, that you maintain lifecycle management, both of your products, but also in terms of your customer solutions. That you stay on top of the quote and order that we talked about just before, and that forecasting and planning is happening in a much better way than just saying, hey, we got a deal on the way here. So end-to-end control of quality and lead time, AI to codify technical operational knowledge, one source of truth for product variants, and of course, analytics to make sure that you learn from your mistakes and can feed that back into the overall model of how you work as a company. So I think, Bo, you had this slide up before. Bridging the different areas of your IT landscape, making sure that you can connect information without issues between these different systems of record is going to be crucial. And of course, one thing that we at Tacton have always held in high regard is that you should be able to have one source of truth for product variants. One place where you know that if it's just aligned with that, you're fine. So when it comes to, and I'll drop it there in terms of slides, I think. When it comes to Gartner, I just wanted to point out, yeah, it's great that Gartner is saying that we're a leader and we're even the leader of leaders, right? At the end of the day, it's, of course, that's nice. Yeah, we like that. But at the end of the day, the reason why they're saying that is the really important thing. What we have been able to show Gartner, and hopefully we've been able to show many of you here as well, is that when you work with us as an organization, it's not just something that you buy one day and then you move on. Tacton stands by you. We make sure that our products are developing over time. We're supporting more and more use cases in your organizations. And we're making sure that you can rest assured that we are a trusted supplier in terms of how we support you. New technology will, of course, arrive. We will be using that. So with Tacton, and that's what we believe Gartner has seen as well, you do have a trusted advisor in terms of how to address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Nils. That's right. Yep. Okay. So one of the greatest things about putting on a customer conference like this is that we get real-time feedback from you all. So we've laid out here what we believe the vision is for the company and how we believe that go-to-market strategies and engineering organizations are going to evolve here, have been evolving and will continue to evolve. We want to know what you think about this. So, by the way, one of the pieces of feedback we got from last year was more breaks. So we're going to take a break. However, here's the thing: if you really agreed with what we were talking about here, we want to hear that. Equally, if not more so, if you disagreed, grab myself or Nils or both of us and let's talk about it. Because we want to hear what's top of mind for all of you. Every year that we do this, there's a tremendous amount of feedback that we get that we then take in and use to change our corporate strategy, our product strategy, our people strategy. And so we want to hear that. Okay? So we're going to take about, I believe it's a 15-minute break at this point. And then when you come back, we're going to start a series of customer stories. We're going to have some of the leaders from some of our most innovative customers presenting here throughout the rest of the day. Bo mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to say it again. There's an incredible amount of expertise and insight within this group amongst your peers. So please take advantage of that. But anyway, we'll be talking about some implementation best practices, lessons learned, those types of things throughout the rest of today. And then tomorrow, we'll get into more detail around the product vision, the roadmap, and all those types of topics. Okay? Again, thank you very much for being here, and let us know what you think.